Marcus Ellison had just placed the last box on the porch when the feeling hit him, sharp, familiar, unavoidable. Someone was watching, not curiosity, not welcome, suspicion. He didn't turn around immediately. He already knew the look. Behind half-closed curtains, a neighbor leaned into their phone, voice tight, breath uneven. "Yeah, a black man," they whispered urgently. "He's unloading a truck in our block. No, I don't recognize him. He's moving like he owns the place. I think he's breaking in. Please send someone now." Marcus finally glanced over. Their eyes met for a split second before the curtain snapped shut. His jaw flexed. He'd heard those words before: doesn't belong, doesn't fit, shouldn't be here. He exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders loose. Any wrong movement could turn this into something else, something dangerous. The sirens came fast, not distant, not curious, aggressive. A patrol car slid to a hard stop in front of his house, tires screeching. The door flew open. "Hands where I can see them," an officer shouted before Marcus could say a word. Another voice cut in immediately. "Turn around, now." "Move to the wall." Marcus raised his hands, slow, deliberate, controlled. His palms stayed open, fingers spread, every motion measured. One officer stepped closer, eyes locked on Marcus's waist. Another circled him. One hand hovered inches above a holster. Not drawn, not yet, but close enough to be a promise. The neighbor had come outside now, standing stiff on the sidewalk, arms folded tight. There was relief on their face. Validation. "See, I was right." Marcus felt the familiar heat crawl up his spine. Not fear, not panic, but something colder. Experience. Memory. The weight of every time calm had been mistaken for guilt. "Sir," an officer said, voice lower now but sharper. "What are you doing here?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked directly at the officer, steady, unblinking, and for the first time the tension shifted, just slightly, a pause. A breath held too long. Then Marcus's lips curved into a calm, unsettling smile. Not the smile of a man cornered. The smile of a man holding the last, biggest card, still face down. Marcus Ellison learned early that suspicion didn't announce itself. It slipped in quietly, through glances, pauses, questions that sounded polite but weren't. He was 12 the first time he understood that. The grocery store was bright, cold with overactive air conditioning. Marcus stood in the candy aisle, fingers wrapped around a chocolate bar he'd already decided not to buy. The wrapper had grown damp from the sweat in his palm. Every time he shifted his weight, he heard it, the soft echo of footsteps stopping when he stopped, moving when he moved. A clerk, white, middle-aged, smiling too hard. "You finding everything okay?" the man asked for the third time, pretending to rearrange a shelf that was already perfect. Marcus nodded, throat tight. He put the candy back carefully, as if returning evidence. When he walked out, empty-handed, the automatic doors hissed open like a quiet warning. That night his father didn't lecture him. He didn't curse the world either. He just stirred sugar into his coffee and said, almost gently, "Some people will decide who you are before you open your mouth. You can't stop that. But you can decide who you become." Marcus carried that sentence like a tool, not for comfort, for survival. Now, decades later, standing in front of his own house with his hands raised, that same lesson hummed under his skin. Calm wasn't surrender. Calm was control. He hadn't joined the police force to prove a point. He joined because he understood systems and how they failed people who didn't look like the ones who built them. At the academy, he learned quickly that excellence alone wasn't enough. It had to be undeniable. While others joked through training drills, Marcus stayed late, rerunning scenarios. While classmates complained about policy manuals, he memorized them, not because he loved rules, but because he knew they'd be used against him before they protected him. "Where'd you learn to write reports like this?" a training officer once asked, skimming Marcus's work with raised eyebrows. Marcus answered evenly, "The manual, sir." The officer laughed. "Guess some people really read it." Marcus noticed the tone. He always did. As a rookie patrol officer, the first time another unit mistook him for a suspect, his heart slammed so hard it blurred his vision. The second time his voice shook. By the third, his hands stayed steady. Calm became muscle memory. Promotions came slowly, each one wrapped in surprise. "You sure you want the supervisory exam?" a colleague asked once. "Yes," Marcus said. "Well, good for you," the man replied, like encouragement offered to someone reaching above their station. Sergeant, lieutenant, captain. At every level, Marcus learned a new version of the same lesson. Authority didn't erase bias, it exposed it. Every decision he made was read twice. Every mistake weighed heavier. When white officers raised their voices, they were passionate. When Marcus did, he was intense. At home, he was different, a husband who double-checked the door locks. A father who knelt to his children's eye level and said things no parent should have to say. Hands visible, speak clearly, never argue on the street, save it for later. His daughter once asked, "Why?" Marcus swallowed before answering. "Because I want you safe." The call making him police chief came without ceremony. The mayor's voice crackled through bad reception. "We think you're the right man for this moment," the mayor said. Marcus stared at the rain streaking his office window. "Understood," he replied. Moment, he thought. Moments pass. Systems don't. As chief, he rewrote training protocols. He sat across from grieving families and let silence do the work. He fired officers the department wanted protected. Each time, he felt the resistance tighten. Each time, he stayed. Buying the house was supposed to be simple. The real estate agent smiled too brightly as they toured the property. "It's a lovely neighborhood," she said, then hesitated. "Are you comfortable with the down payment?" Marcus met her eyes. "Yes," he said. She laughed nervously. "Of course." "Just checking." The neighbor's smiles came next. Polite, curious, measuring. Standing in the driveway now, officers circling him, Marcus cataloged details the way he always did. The younger officer's jaw was clenched, fear disguised as authority. The senior one stood wider, hand hovering inches from his holster. Not drawn, not accidental. The neighbor watched from the sidewalk, arms folded tight, relief flickering across their face. "See, I told you." Marcus felt the familiar heat rise, but he kept his face unreadable. He understood the officers. He didn't excuse them. There was a difference. They saw a black man in a hoodie. They didn't see the policies he'd written. The officers he'd disciplined. The city he ran. His arms stayed raised. His breathing slow. This wasn't the first time his armor had been tested, but it might be the first time the system would be forced to look directly at itself. "Turn around," slowly. The command landed heavy, sharp enough to slice through the air. Marcus complied without hesitation, rotating his body inch by inch, palms still raised. The gravel beneath his shoes crunched louder than it should have, every sound amplified by the silence watching from behind closed doors. "Keep your hands up," the senior officer said, stepping closer. His voice was controlled, but his stance betrayed him, feet wide, shoulders tight. His right hand hovered over his holster, thumb brushing the edge like it was already familiar with the shape of the weapon beneath. Marcus noticed everything. He always did. "What's your name?" the officer asked. Marcus paused just long enough to measure the tone, not curiosity, suspicion dressed as procedure. "Marcus," he said calmly. "Last name, Ellison." The younger officer circled behind him, boots scraping the driveway. "You live here, Marcus Ellison." "Yes." The neighbor let out a short, incredulous laugh from the sidewalk. "That's what he says." Marcus felt the muscles in his neck tighten, but he kept his gaze forward. "And you can prove that?" the senior officer pressed. "My ID is inside," Marcus replied. "On the kitchen counter." The officer's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying you expect us to just take your word for it?" "I'm saying," Marcus answered evenly, "that I haven't done anything illegal." A beat. "Sir," the younger officer snapped, "this isn't a debate." The word "sir" sounded forced, uncomfortable in his mouth. The neighbor stepped closer, emboldened now that uniform stood between them. "I told dispatch he didn't belong here. We've lived on this block for 15 years. We know our neighbors." Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. "Open them again." "Belong." The senior officer raised a hand, silencing the neighbor barely. "Ma'am, please step back." "But you see it, right?" the neighbor insisted. "He just shows up with a truck. No warning, no introduction." "That's not normal." Normal. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd heard that word before too. The younger officer leaned in closer. "Sir, are there any weapons in the vehicle or on your person?" "No," Marcus said. "Any criminal record we should know about?" The question lingered too long. Heavy, loaded. "No," Marcus repeated, his voice steady, though his jaw tightened. The radio crackled on the senior officer's shoulder. Dispatch checking in. "A routine call," they'd said. "Suspicious person. Possible break-in. Possible." The officer spoke quietly into the mic, eyes never leaving Marcus, still assessing. The neighbor folded their arms again, nodding to themselves, convinced the process alone was proof enough. "Why'd you call the police?" Marcus asked suddenly, turning his head just enough to look at them. The senior officer snapped, eyes forward. Marcus obeyed, but the question hung there anyway. The neighbor scoffed. "Because you looked suspicious." "In what way?" Marcus asked, still calm. The neighbor hesitated, words tangling. "You know, the way you were moving, watching the house, like you were casing it." Marcus let out a slow breath through his nose. "I was carrying boxes." "That doesn't mean anything," the neighbor shot back. "People steal houses like that all the time." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. The senior one's jaw tightened. "Sir," the senior officer said, lowering his voice, "we're going to pat you down for everyone's safety." Marcus felt the moment click into place. "I do not consent," he said clearly, not raising his voice. The neighbor gasped. "See. He's resisting." "I am not resisting," Marcus replied. "I am stating my rights." The younger officer's hand twitched. The senior officer stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell coffee on his breath. "Sir," he said quietly, dangerously calm, "you don't get to decide how this goes." Marcus felt his pulse finally shift, not race, not spike, but deepen. This was the edge, the place where misunderstandings turned into headlines. "Turn around fully," the officer ordered. "Hands behind your back." A murmur rippled through the street. Curtains fluttered. A car slowed to a crawl. Marcus didn't move. "I am standing on my property," he said. "I have complied with every lawful order so far." The neighbor's voice rose, shrill now. "Why are you still talking to him like this? Just put him in cuffs." The senior officer's eyes flicked to the neighbor, then back to Marcus. "Sir, last warning." Marcus weighed the room the way a chess player weighed a board. Every move had consequences. Every pause carried risk. Slowly, deliberately, he began to turn. The younger officer moved fast, too fast, grabbing Marcus's arm. The contact was firm, unnecessary. Marcus's breath caught not in pain but in recognition. "Do not touch me like that," Marcus said, voice low. "Stop resisting," the younger officer barked, pushing Marcus toward the wall. "I am not resisting." Marcus snapped back, the edge finally surfacing. The senior officer stepped in, pressing Marcus's shoulder. "Hands behind your back." Now the neighbor smiled. For a split second, Marcus saw it clearly, the image they had already written for him, the report they were ready to file, the assumptions that would fill in every blank. He closed his eyes, then opened them. "Officer," Marcus said, controlled but unyielding, "you need to slow this down." "Or what?" the younger officer shot back. "Or what?" the words echoed. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He felt the weight of the cuffs as the senior officer pulled them free, metal glinting in the fading light. He felt the eyes of the street pressing in, waiting. This was the moment his armor was tested, not by force but by restraint. "Do it," the neighbor urged, "before he runs." Marcus let out a breath, steady, deliberate. "I am not running," he said, "and you are about to make a very serious mistake." The senior officer hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Enough to matter, sir," he said slowly. "What is it you think we're missing?" Marcus turned his head just enough to meet his eyes. "Context," he replied. The word landed between them like a dropped glass, fragile, dangerous. The street held its breath, and somewhere between the cuffs, the commands, and the certainty of the neighbor's smile, the incident crossed a line it could never uncross. The cuffs never closed, but they were close enough to matter. The senior officer still held them, metal dangling from his fingers, uncertain now. The shouting had stopped, but the tension hadn't eased. It had only changed shape, thicker, heavier, more dangerous. Marcus lowered his hands slowly when the officer nodded. Blood rushed back into his fingers in a dull ache. He flexed them once, then let them fall to his sides. The neighbor exhaled sharply. "So, are you done here or not?" No one answered. Another cruiser rolled up, not fast, not loud, controlled, intentional. Two more officers stepped out, scanning the scene. Their eyes moved from the moving truck to the boxes, to Marcus, then to the cuffs. "What's the status?" one of them asked. "Possible break-in," the senior officer said. "Caller claimed the subject didn't belong." Subject. Marcus turned his head slightly. "Before you clear this call," he said, calm but firm, "there's something you should hear." The younger officer scoffed. "Sir, we've already—" "Turn your radio up," Marcus said. The command wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The senior officer hesitated, then reached to his shoulder mic. Static burst through, then a clear voice filled the driveway. "All units, stand by for District 5 briefing. This is Chief Marcus Ellison." Effective immediately, the world stopped. The neighbor's face drained of color so fast it looked unreal. Their mouth opened, but no sound came out. The younger officer froze mid-step. The senior officer's grip loosened. The cuffs slipped from his hand and hit the driveway with a sharp metallic clack. The radio continued. "Any use of force complaints will be reviewed directly by my office. Badge numbers must be logged accurately. No exceptions." The senior officer slowly turned to Marcus. His eyes widened. "Chief," he said, barely audible. Marcus reached into his pocket, not rushed, not dramatic, and pulled out his wallet. He opened it, flipped it once, and held it out. Gold seal, photo, title, Chief of Police District 5. The younger officer's face went pale. His arrogance collapsed into something raw and unmistakable: panic. I didn't know," he stammered. Sir, I mean Chief, Marcus didn't raise his voice. That would have been easy. Badge number, he said. The younger officer swallowed. What? Your badge number, Marcus repeated, eyes locked on him. The officer rattled it off too fast. And yours, Marcus said, turning to the senior officer. The man straightened instinctively, gave it. The neighbor staggered back a step. This has to be some kind of joke. Marcus finally looked at them fully. You called 911 on a black man, he said evenly, because he didn't look like he belonged. The neighbors shook their head weakly. I was just being careful. No, Marcus said. You were being comfortable. Silence crushed the driveway. The radio clicked off. The senior officer cleared his throat, voice tight. Chief Ellison, I sincerely apologize. This situation was mishandled. Mishandled, Marcus echoed softly. The word hung there. He stepped closer, not threatening, just undeniable. You put hands on me. You reached for cuffs. You escalated based on a call rooted in bias. The younger officer stared at the ground. You froze, Marcus continued, because now the uniform means something to you. The neighbors' knees buckled. They grabbed the porch railing to steady themselves. I didn't know you were, they whispered. That's the point, Marcus said. You shouldn't have needed to. He turned back to the officers. This incident will be documented fully. And it will be used in training. Yes, Chief, the senior officer said immediately. Marcus nodded once. Clear the scene. The officers didn't argue. Engines started quickly now, too quickly. The cruisers pulled away without another word. The neighbor stood frozen, eyes glassy. Marcus picked up one of the boxes near his feet. The corner was crushed from where a boot had nudged it earlier. He brushed it off slowly. Then he looked back at the neighbor. You wanted to protect your neighborhood, he said quietly. Congratulations. The neighbor flinched. You just learned who's in charge of protecting it. He carried the box inside. Behind him, the street stayed silent, not curious anymore, humbled. The radio crackled, not loudly, just enough to cut through the night like a blade slipping between ribs. All units in District 5, stand by for the incoming briefing. This is regarding the formal induction of the new chief of police. Repeat, all units. The younger officer's hand froze mid-motion. His fingers hovered over the flashlight, the beam trembling as it rested on Marcus's chest. The senior officer tilted his head. What was that? The radio spoke again, clearer now, colder. Chief Marcus Ellison will assume full operational authority effective immediately. Attendance mandatory. Silence swallowed the street. The porch light hummed overhead. Somewhere down the block, a car door slammed. A dog barked once, then stopped. The senior officer slowly turned toward Marcus, not with suspicion anymore, with calculation. Marcus exhaled. He had been holding his breath longer than he realized, not from fear, but from restraint, from choosing patience over force, silence over truth. That choice was over. He stepped back toward the open doorway and reached inside. The younger officer flinched. Hey, don't, Marcus returned a moment later, holding a leather badge wallet. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, didn't smile. He simply opened it. Gold caught the porch light. The words Chief of Police sat heavy beneath his photograph. The senior officer's jaw tightened. The younger officer stared, eyes widening, color draining from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. No, he whispered. No, that's, Marcus met his gaze. It's real. The radio chirped again. Chief Ellison is en route to district headquarters. Units are advised. The senior officer reached for the radio and clicked it off. Too late. The damage was already done. The younger officer swallowed hard. His shoulders collapsed inward, posture breaking like cheap plywood under weight. I didn't know, he stammered. Sir, Chief. I mean, Marcus closed the badge wallet and slipped it back into his jacket. You didn't ask, he said calmly. You assumed. The word hung there. Assumed. The senior officer straightened his uniform as if fabric could restore authority. Chief Ellison, with all due respect, we were responding to a call. A neighbor reported suspicious behavior. Marcus turned toward the house across the street. The neighbor's curtains twitched. Marcus raised his voice, not to shout but to carry. Suspicious, he repeated. Unloading boxes, in my own driveway, with my name on the deed. The senior officer didn't respond. Marcus stepped closer. I asked for your names earlier, Marcus continued. You refused. The younger officer snapped to attention. Officer Daniel Reyes, badge number 74,182. Too fast, too eager. The senior officer hesitated half a second longer. Lieutenant Howard Klein, badge 30,917. Marcus nodded. Thank you, he said. Now we can all be precise. He turned back to the younger officer. Officer Reyes, when you placed your hand on your weapon, what threat did you identify? Reyes opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Marcus didn't raise his voice. Was it the boxes? No, sir. My house? No, sir. My skin? Reyes's eyes dropped. Marcus shifted his attention to Klein. Lieutenant, when your officer escalated the stop, did you de-escalate? Klein cleared his throat. We were following protocol. Marcus stepped even closer now, close enough that Klein could see the reflection of himself in Marcus's eyes. Protocol doesn't excuse failure of judgment, Marcus said, and it doesn't override accountability. The radio in Klein's hand felt heavier now, like evidence. Marcus turned toward the neighbor's house again. The front door creaked open. The neighbor stepped out halfway, face pale, trying to look confused instead of guilty. Officer," the man called out. "Everything okay?" Marcus answered him. "Yes," he said. "Everything is very clear now." The neighbor squinted, confused. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe." Marcus nodded once. "By calling armed officers on a man you didn't know." The neighbor shrugged weakly. "You can't be too careful these days." Marcus let the silence stretch. Then, "Careful has a cost." The words landed differently now, not as a warning, as a verdict. Marcus turned back to the officers. "Lieutenant Klein, Officer Reyes. You are relieved from this scene." Reyes blinked. "Sir, you will return to your vehicles. You will file a full incident report, including why no probable cause was established, why a weapon was nearly drawn, and why a lawful resident was detained without justification." Klein stiffened. "Chief, with respect," Marcus interrupted, calm but immovable. "You will also include the neighbor's statement and the originating call." The neighbor's face drained of color. I didn't mean." Marcus raised a hand. "You'll have an opportunity to explain," he said, "just not tonight." The officers backed away now, not because they were told, because authority had finally revealed itself, and it didn't look like a uniform. It looked like restraint sharpened into command. As they reached their cruiser, Reyes paused. He turned back, voice shaking. "Sir, I'm sorry." Marcus held his gaze. "I believe you," he said. "But belief doesn't undo impact." Reyes nodded once and got into the car. The engine started. The cruiser pulled away. The street exhaled. Marcus stood alone in his driveway again. Boxes half unpacked. Night air still thick. But something had shifted. Not just power, truth. Across the street, the neighbor retreated inside, door closing far more carefully than before. Marcus looked down at his hands. Steady. Always had been. Inside the house, his phone buzzed. "A message from headquarters. They're waiting for you, Chief." Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The porch light clicked off, but the reckoning had only just begun. Morning arrived without apology. Sunlight spilled across the street Marcus Ellison now called home, revealing what the night had tried to hide. Creased tire tracks where the cruiser had idled too long, a crushed blade of grass where an officer's boot had rested, boxes still half open like questions waiting for answers. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter, coffee untouched, jacket folded neatly beside his badge. The city had already woken up. His phone buzzed again. Internal AFFAIRS has opened a review. Body cam footage SECURED. Neighbor statement flagged. Marcus read the messages once, then set the phone face down. Justice didn't need an audience to begin. At headquarters, the mood was different than usual. Quieter, straighter. Officers lowered their voices when Marcus passed. Not out of fear, but awareness. The kind that comes when consequences stop being theoretical. In the briefing room, Lieutenant Klein stood near the wall. Officer Reyes sat rigid in his chair, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Marcus didn't single them out, he addressed everyone. "Last night," he began, voice steady, "wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a system behaving exactly as it had been allowed to behave. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth. We talk about community trust like it's fragile glass," Marcus continued, "but we forget who keeps dropping it." A screen lit up behind him. Body cam footage, the hesitation, the hand on the weapon. The assumption masquerading as instinct. Marcus let it play, then he turned it off. "Effective immediately," he said. "We are implementing mandatory bias recalibration training, not optional." "Not symbolic," a ripple moved through the room. "Second," Marcus continued, "any call originating from a suspicious person complaint without articulable facts will require supervisor verification before escalation." Klein swallowed. "Third," Marcus said, eyes forward, "officers involved in last night's incident are placed on administrative leave pending review." Reyes closed his eyes. Marcus didn't look at him. "This is not punishment," Marcus added. "It's responsibility." After the meeting, Marcus stepped outside. The city looked the same. That's how injustice often survives, by blending in. Across town, the neighbor sat at his kitchen table, hands shaking as he read the notice taped to his door. False report review failure to establish threat. The words felt heavier than he expected. He had told himself he was being careful. Now he was being watched. Back at Marcus's house, a moving truck pulled away. The last box sat inside, unopened. Marcus carried it to the living room and set it down. Inside was a framed photograph. His father, in uniform, decades earlier. A man who had taught him that authority meant nothing without restraint, and restraint meant nothing without accountability. Marcus placed the frame on the mantel. That night the street was quiet again, but not unaware. Porch lights stayed on a little longer, curtains moved a little less, and for the first time the silence didn't feel tense, it felt earned. Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the neighborhood. Justice hadn't roared, it had recalibrated, and tomorrow the city would wake up under a system that finally knew who it served, not perfectly, but consciously. The kind of beginning that lasts. The city moved on, as it always did. Cars rolled through intersections. Sirens echoed somewhere far away, detached from urgency. Morning routines resumed their quiet rhythm, but something subtle had shifted beneath the surface, like a recalibrated compass pointing slightly truer north. On Marcus Ellison Street, the porch lights went dark earlier now, not out of fear, out of ease. The neighbor avoided eye contact when they crossed paths days later, not because Marcus demanded it, because accountability had a way of rearranging posture. The confidence that once came from calling authority had been replaced with something unfamiliar, caution. Inside the department, the changes weren't loud, but they were permanent. Reports became longer. Language became precise. Officers paused before acting, not because they were afraid, but because they were thinking. Names were checked. Assumptions were questioned. Silence was no longer mistaken for threat. Marcus never spoke about that night again. He didn't need to. His presence did the talking. At home, the last box was finally unpacked. The kitchen filled with the sound of coffee brewing. The house began to feel lived in, not defended. On the mantel, his father's photograph caught the afternoon light. Marcus glanced at it once, then back toward the window. Authority had tested him that night. Not his badge, not his title, his restraint, and it had held, because real power doesn't arrive with flashing lights. It arrives quietly, correcting course, closing gaps, and reminding systems that they are being watched too. The city would forget the details, but it would remember the outcome. And somewhere the next time a call came in about a suspicious man, a pause would exist where none had before. That pause was Marcus's legacy. Not control, not revenge, but consequence, and that was enough.